Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 2. We'll discuss about audit of purchase and payment cycle. The member of this group are Nur Aisyah binti Zulkifli, Nur Faradina binti Roslan, Alif Hasanah binti Muhammad, Nurin Humaira binti D. Muhammad Hafizi, Nur Ashikin binti Basirun, Adriana Nur Syuhada binti Syaiful Anwar, Fitrah Sabriah binti Siddiq, Muhammad Haris Fikri bin Abdul Hadi, and Muhammad Afiq Hidayat bin Abdullah. This chapter will discuss about the audit of classes of purchase transaction, cash payment and balance of account payable. The purchase cycle includes purchasing transactions that begin with the requisition of goods or service, then a purchase order is placed for the goods or service, the goods or service are then received from supplier, and finally the recording of all the bills and payments of account payable. This chapter specifically discusses further audit procedure performed for purchase and payable, such as test of control and substantive tests.
Nature of purchases and accounts payable. So what are the nature of purchases and accounts payable? In general, auditors should understand the purchase, payment and purchase adjustment transactions processes when they audit the purchase cycle. Information flows in the cycle through numerous accounts such as purchase, cash payments, accounts payable, and purchase returns and discounts. So the first one is, the purchase cycle process includes receiving requests from departments, which are usually accompanied by certain documentations to support the transaction, such as a requisition form. The purchasing department will make an order for goods with the suppliers by completing a purchase order form. The process of receiving and billing from suppliers also involves documents such as delivery notes and purchase invoices. Recording process involves journals, accounts, and statements, while a payment voucher is a document used in purchase and account payable payments. For each process in the purchase cycle, controls should be in place by the companies to mitigate, or in other words, to detect any frauds or misstatements in the financial statements. In addition, auditors should assess whether such controls are actually working effectively to detect misstatements in a specific financial statement assertion. The controls assessments are performed in the test of controls after considering results from risk assessments. The auditor should design an appropriate audit approach based on the assessments of the identified risks at both the financial statement level and the assertion level. This is because the assessed risks differ between the material classes of transactions, account balances, and disclosures. Hence, the most appropriate and effective audit approach will vary. This means that every kind of risk has different type of audit approach based on the risk. For example, tests of controls are more appropriate to test for the completeness of purchases, while substantive tests are applicable for other assertions. Furthermore, tests of controls focus on the operation of controls over purchase transactions and the recording process in a purchase cycle, rather than on the accuracy of purchase and payable amounts.
So the next one, we are going to explain the accounting system and the control activities. There are 5 main functions in the purchase cycle that consist of the requisition of goods and services, preparing the purchase orders, receiving and storing goods received for the inventory, reviewing and approving the supplier's invoice, and also recording the liabilities. The first one is purchase requisition. A purchase requisition form is also known as a purchase request or a purchase requisitions. It is the first transaction trail of documentary evidence where it is used to request the goods and services to be purchased. The authenticity of the request needs to be checked to ensure that the transaction created has no fictitious and also to ensure the occurrence of the purchase transactions. The pre-number purchase requisition form is a form of control to ensure that the good requests are appropriately ordered and received. This form should be authorized by an appropriate requisition authority in the entity. Purchase requisition is not only describe the supplier's descriptions, but it is also describe the goods, quantity order, prices, and also the item codes. It means that the purchaser used the form to describe the purchase and why it is needed. Then, the form is sent to another person, such as a department head, to review and approve the purchase. If the requisition is not approved, the approver should explain why the purchase is denied. If approved, the requisition becomes a purchase order, then sent to the supplier to formally request the product or services to be delivered to the business. The second one is preparing the purchase orders. The preparation of purchase order is entrusted to an independent department from the warehouse to avoid fraudulent requisition of the good for the personal use. It is prepared by the purchase department upon receiving an authorized requisition form from the department or the warehouse. Purchase order is described precisely the good or services required, the quantity, prices, delivery mode, and the supplier's detail. For example, name and address. It is also used as an audit evidence on the occurrence of purchase transaction, and it should be pre-numbered and properly authorized by the purchasing manager. In addition, independent review is performed by purchasing officer to determine that the good order and receipt are recorded in order to ensure the completeness of the purchase transaction. So this is the example of the purchase requisition form.
Next, we will move to the third function, which is receiving and storing the goods for inventory. In this phase, approved purchase order will be sent to the warehouse where the goods will be received by a storekeeper from supplier. It is important to ensure that the goods received are duly ordered and delivery of unordered goods should be rejected. Thus, the storekeeper should check the description of goods quantity and condition of the good. For each delivery, the storekeeper prepare a pre-numbered good receipt notes or known as GRN to describe the goods, quantity, and condition of the goods. The GRN will be sent to the account department and serve as an important evidence to support the occurrence of the purchase transaction. To achieve the audit objective of completeness in purchase transaction records, an independent check on the sequence number of pre-numbered GRN to prevent the fraud or error, such as repeating recording or unauthorized usage, which this is made by the accounting personnel. So this is the example of goods received note or GRN. The fourth function is approving supplier's invoice. This supplier's invoice will be issued by seller to buyers, and a supplier's invoice will be sent by the supplier to the accounting department after the storekeeper receives the goods. And this is the example of supplier's invoice. So here is the controls that should be established by the entity. Some of the controls are needed to ensure that the audit objective will be achieved. To achieve completeness, a company should record the supplier invoice by providing serial numbers for all invoice received. Second objective, which is occurrence, an entity relate the supplier's invoice to a valid purchase transaction by checking the invoice and matching against the GRN and purchase order. Third is accuracy. A company should ensure that the amount stated in the supplier's invoice is accurate and agreed by the buyer and seller. Fourth is accuracy and classification. A company will provide a code to every supplier's invoice to ensure that the invoices are recorded correctly to appropriate accounts, such as assets and expenses. The second last control activity is a company will ensure that all suppliers' invoices are approved and recorded before payment is paid. This control is needed to achieve occurrence. The last control activity is a company will prepare a pre-list of suppliers approved for payment to make sure there is no delay of payment or unpaid suppliers' invoice. This activity is helped in achieve the accuracy, completeness, and accuracy.
Next is recording the purchases and liabilities. Controls should be established when recording the purchases and liabilities to ensure that all transactions are recorded and that there are no overstatement of liabilities. In addition, controls are also established to ensure that the purchase amounts are recorded accurately and in the proper period. Several steps are involved in recording the purchases. The first step is the supplier's invoice are entered in a purchase journal in numerical sequence to avoid any missing invoice. The second step is the supplier's journal is posted to the accounts payable subsidiaries ledger. The general ledger and account payable balance are periodically compared to ensure the agreement are both balanced. The third step is the purchase journals are posted to the general ledger. And the last step is a monthly supplier statement is reconciled against the account payable balance. Any difference between the balance recorded by the customers and the company can be rectified immediately. However, the process of recording the purchases is varied depending on the nature of the business and the accounting system used by the company. Lastly, payment transactions. Payment transaction is the process of cash payment for purchase and payables, involve paying the liability and recording the payment. For paying the liability, the cash payments for payables are then updated in the accounts payable records to reduce the amount of payables. A list of payable balance due for payment is prepared periodically to provide the payment department information concerning the current status of account payables. It also helps to ensure that a prompt payment is made to supplier. Next is recording the payment. The recording of payments should be properly made to ensure completeness of the record. The payment transactions will be updated in the payment journal and general ledger once the payments are authorized and the checks are issued to the suppliers. The account payable master files are also updated.
Next, developing the audit plan. The process of developing the audit plan for purchases and payables involves performing risk assessment procedures by obtaining an understanding of the entity and its internal control over purchases and payables. Based on the information obtained, the risks of material misstatements are assessed and further audit procedures are designed. First, understanding the entity to identify inherent risks. Second, obtaining understanding of internal controls over purchase and payables. Third, assessing risk of material misstatements. And lastly, designing further audit procedures. Understanding the entity to identify inherent risk. Inherent risk is risk posed by error or omission in a financial statement due to a factor other than a failure of controls. Understanding the entity and its environment is very important in audit planning. It helps to determine the potential misstatements in financial reports. Regarding the purchase and payables, the auditor should understand the nature of the entity's businesses in terms of A. The types of the company's products or services, such as cost of sale and gross margins can be determined by understanding the products, and B. The nature of expenses. Level of purchases and payables can be estimated by understanding the client's business and the average payment period of the industry. Furthermore, an understanding of the entity's business environment can help to assess inherent risks relating to assumptions for purchases and payables. A number of potential inherent risks are derived from motivation of management to inaccurate report expenses, such as A. Pressure to achieve the targeted profits may lead the client to understate their expenses. B. Pressure to report a higher level of working capital may lead the client to understate their payables. And C. High volume of transactions that would affect all assertions. In the event that a fraud risk is identified, the auditor should make sure that controls over purchases and payables are established and implemented adequately and effectively. The design of the audit plan should reflect its response to risk of fraud, such as performing further audit procedures to address the risk of fraud. Maintaining an understanding of internal controls over purchases and payables. Inherent risks related to purchases and payables can be reduced by establishing appropriate and effective internal controls. Thus, auditors should understand the controls over purchases and payables by preparing a written description or a flow chart. In addition, auditors may complete internal controls questionnaires for purchases and payables to obtain an understanding of the internal controls. Then, the auditor may determine if the internal controls over the purchases and payables are implemented appropriately and effectively. For example, the implementation of segregation of functions between invoice verification and approval and function of cash disbursement and can be observed by the auditor. To obtain an understanding of the internal controls, auditor may observe, make inquiries seeking further details from management, and review documents such as purchase documents to determine whether the sequence of pre-numbered documents are appropriately recorded. Also, monthly reconciliation between detailed records of accounts payable to the general ledger control account is performed to prevent any unreconciled balances.
Next is about assessing risk and designing further audit procedure. What is assisting? Assisting is an act of judgment by the auditor to analyze the transaction regarding an industry in a particular company, whereas the auditor will determine what type of risks are they. Either they are low, medium, or high inherent risks. After that, how is designing? After an auditor recognizes the downfall of the risk, the auditor should respond to it. He or she needs to evaluate to determine the amount of further tests that will be performed. Where these tests are responsive towards the assessed risk, hereby the auditor will come out with the component of test control and substantive procedure. How does it work? Step 1. Purchase activities involve purchase requisition, receiving report on goods and check register. All these activities has the chances of misfigure, error of data and document handling. This is what causes inherent risk to occur upon the internal control. Step 2. After the auditor recognizes the inherent risk, the auditor evaluates the risk and designs the next procedure in order to avoid the occurrences of these risks in the future. At step 3, finally, when the auditor done evaluating, the auditor now knows what test control and substantive procedure to apply to the significant risk of mistake.
Okay, now without no further ado, let us continue to the next subsection, which is performing further audit procedures. In this subsection, there are two more sections, which is test of control and substantive procedure. Okay, now I will explain to you about test control. Okay, the test control are divided into two assessments, which is test for design effectiveness and test for operating effectiveness. In the test design effectiveness, using the understanding of the information system and internal control system are specific to client to determine the presence of essential control over purchases and payables. Using means that using the auditor's knowledge or information about the company or client company of their control system or information system, the auditor need to understand it in the purchase cycle to determine the necessary control of the purchase and payables that run by the company and identify the potential misstatement in the company and payable. So next we go to the test for operating effectiveness. In the test for operating effectiveness, the auditor should perform tests for operating effectiveness of the control of the company. So in this test, the auditor may use, for example, to perform observation or the performance and document inspection, which is involved watching and tracing in the company document of purchase and payables, so that the auditor have information about the company that they can make sure that make sure or may done a conclusion of the purchase and payable of the company or client. Are they effective? Are they runs effective or smooth, or they are not effective of the control? So in this statement, in this operating effectiveness, also known as the dual purpose test, because sometimes the auditor may obtain substantive evidence while testing the operating of the control. So that means that sometimes it is called as dual purpose test. The auditors should be cautiously draw conclusion, because the tests of control are concerned about the number of misstatements that have been done by the company and not the size. The size of the misstatement are assessed using substantive tests, which is the substantive tests are significant to be when they are material. Then after the test, the auditor may run a conclusion about the purchase and payable of the company. So they are run like smoothly or effectively or not. Okay, next we go to the control risk assessment. For the control risk assessment, there are three things that you can see, which is the function firstly, next the potential misstatements, and the control procedure. Okay, the potential misstatement may be done by the company, and the control procedure need to be done by the company by advice from the auditor, so that there are no misstatement in the company financial statements. Okay, next, first function is requisition of goods and services. The main potential misstatements are requests are made for unauthorized purpose, for non-authorized purpose of the company or the client or the staff of the company. Okay. So requisition, the control procedure or requisition are checked prior to approval of the goods and services requested. So next we see the next function, preparing the purchase order. The potential misstatements are the purchase are made for unauthorized purposes. So the control procedures are each purchase's requisition should be approved by the director, the manager, or the someone in charge of the company, like the supervisors that holding the stocks. Okay, next, receiving and storing goods. So the potential misstatements are unordered goods are received. The quantity and good received are not in agreement with the purchase order, means that there is a mistake in the quantity will be or less or more than the agreed in the purchase order. Next, the damaged goods are received. So how to control this or control procedure of these potential misstatements are all goods issued are checked against approved purchase orders in terms of quantity and types of goods by independent personnel. Means that the store clerk or somebody in charge in the storing should be checking the quantity and type of goods, so there are no damaged goods or the quantity of the good they receive in the perfect condition or perfect quantity. So the next control procedures are pre-numbered GRN are prepared for each good received. Okay, next we go to the next function, approving the supplier invoice. Okay, the potential misstatements are invoices include unordered goods. So sometimes the invoices that being forward are included but of unordered goods, meaning that they are wastage. So the control procedure GRN are matched with the approved purchase order for each invoice. So the next function is recording the supply invoice. The supply invoice are not recorded. The potential is misstatement or the supply invoice are not recorded. Invoice are recorded to the wrong supply account. So how do we control this? Or how the auditor control this? All the purchase invoices are enclosed with the matching GRN approved purchase order. Next, the periodic accounting for all supply invoice, GRN and purchase order. Next, the total of all supply invoice are checked against the total amount of the journal, meaning that there have been a double checking of double entry, so that there are no misstatement happen between these invoices or the wrong account. Okay, next, independent check on journal and purchase account, and monthly reconciliation is prepared, and any difference are followed up so that there are no less or more in the purchase account. An account are matched perfectly with the purchase order and the payment order. Okay, next function is payment of cash purchases and payables. So the potential misstatements are checked are issued for unauthorized purchases, double payment for a supply invoice, check altered after being signed. So how the auditor need to control this, or the company can or need to control this? All supporting documents for the payments are received or reviewed before checks are signed. So all paid suppliers invoice should be stamped paid, so that after being signed, and check should be mailed by the check signers, so that there are no altered check. The check signer already know that he or she have already posted or emailed mailed the check, so that there are no miss or unauthorized check usage. Okay, next, the last function is recording the payments. Okay, the payments, the potential misstatement are the payments are incorrect or not recorded. the payment are not posted to the wrong supply account. Payments may not be recorded promptly. So how the company need to do the control procedure or procedure control is that they must use of or an accounting for P-number checks, independent check of agreement of amount generalized and posted with the check summary. Okay, and the last one is periodic preparation of bank reconciliation so that the client or company know that where are the check or money that they have been saved in the company's bank account goes to. In example, sometimes if the company that the bank reconciliation, they did not know how much are the real cash in their bank, and there are maybe a shortage of cash or liquidity happen in the company, so that maybe happen in the company. That's why the bank reconciliation or any reconciliation are important to the company so that the company may know their financial position in every way so that they can make sure the payment or purchase of the payables that they have done or they have agreed, they pay it in time or they can pay it, or unless the company will go bankrupt and they cannot run anymore. Okay, next we go to the next one is the computer assisted audit techniques, which is based on six things, which is existence, occurrence, completeness, accuracy, cut-off, and classification of purchases payable. Is the two categories. The auditor's technique as described two categories of control for computer information system. General control and application control. So if you want to see the sample of the CATS, you can refer to the textbook of page 170 and 171 to see the CAATS, and the source is by Young, Graham, Hopper, and Richardson. So,
Next is the substantive procedures. Substantive procedures is a procedure that auditors conduct to identify material errors that may arise in financial statements. It is to collect substantive evidence on account balance, transaction classes, and disclosures of financial statement of the client. It is also to respond adequately to the accessories of material representation. The nature, timing, and extent of substantive audit process are directly affected by the risk level of material representation. There are two types of substantive procedure, which is analytical procedures and test of detail. For analytical procedures, it is a procedure that auditors perform to obtain evidence about the reasonableness of amounts shown in the financial statements, and it is performed in 4 stages. The first one is to review the understanding of the entity as to whether any changes to payable balance are to be expected. Next, it is to determine any fluctuation in amount of purchases and payable balance between this year and the previous year. Besides that, it is to determine ratio and trends for gross profit and average payment period. An unusual change in gross profit margin compared to previous year's figure signifies the possibility of misstatements in recording purchases. It is also to analyze expense account by reviewing the ratio between each category of purchase with the total sales and compare with the previous year's ratio to determine the level of the activity for the current year to ensure the completeness of the purchase records. The auditor will compare acquisition-related expense account balance with the prior years. The possible misstatement that will happen is misstatement of accounts payable and expenses. Next, the auditor will do a review list of account payable for unusual, non-vendor and interested bearing payables. The possible misstatement that will happen is classification misstatement for non-trade liabilities. Furthermore, the auditor will compare individual accounts payable with previous year. The possible misstatement that will happen is unrecorded or non-existent account or misstatements. Next, the auditor will calculate ratio such as purchase dividend by account payable and account payable dividend by current liabilities. The misstatement that will happen is unrecorded or non-existent account or misstatements.
Now we are going to the second types of substantive procedure, which is test of details transaction. It is performed during interim audit and in the form of dual purpose test. One of the example is perform cut-off test. What is the cut-off test? I will verify it later. However, it serves to verify the account balance of purchases at the end of reporting period. For document inspection, we have two, which are vouching and tracing. Vouching, auditors vouch recorded purchase transaction to supporting documents such as purchase orders, good receipt notes, and suppliers invoices to verify the occurrence of the transaction. Ataupun dalam kata lainnya, auditors ni dia confirmkan semua yang recorded purchase transaction ni sah. Transaction, purchase orders, good receipt notes dengan supplies invoices ni sah. Untuk for the seconds, which is tracing, auditors trace from purchase orders, good receipt notes, supplies invoices to purchase journals and accounts payable to verify the completeness of record. For the cut-off test, we have two, which are purchase cut-off test and payment cut-off test. What is purchase cut-off test? It is to ensure that current year purchase and payables are recorded in the current period. And if there are changes in purchases and payables, it is reflected in the records of inventories and cost of sales for the current year. How to do the purchase cut-off test? First, auditor must obtain the number of the last good receipt notes for the final receipt of the year. For the good receipt notes, it is a record of good receipt from supplier and as a proof that order product has been received. It is also used by the buyer for comparing the number of goods ordered to the ones delivered. Second, select sample of good receipt notes before the last number and match with the purchase order state to ensure that purchases are recognized in the current year. And last, check on the agreement with entries in purchase journals to ensure that they are recorded in the current year. Bila sesuatu company tu buat pembelian, mestilah macam banyak kan. Banyak dia buat pembelian pada tahun tersebut lah. So, mestilah dia ada good receipt notes tu. Lepas tu, auditor ni pula, dia kena dapatkan nombor terakhir good receipt notes tu. Supaya nanti dia akan pilih sampel of good receipt notes ni sebelum nombor terakhir. Lepas tu auditor ni akan matchkan dengan order date ni ada ke tak ada pembelian tu, ada tak pembelian tu pada tahun tersebut. Lepas tu pula lepas dia dah pastikan yang good receipt notes ni dengan dengan order state ni ada, maksudnya adalah, dia pula kena check pula agreement dengan entries in purchase journal untuk pastikan yang pembelian ni dah record dah untuk tahun tersebut. Here we are with the second cut-off test, which is payments cut-off test. It is designed to provide evidence that payments are recorded in the appropriate period, and it is to ensure the correct presentation of cash and liabilities. Furthermore, before the last numbers of the final payments for the current year, the chosen payment vouchers will be inspected in terms of dates and tracked to payment journals. Also, perform verification on the date of presentation of checks unpresented at the end of reporting period, which is part of the test on bank reconciliation.
This is another types of substantive procedure, which is test of details balance. It is concerned to obtain of evidence for accounts payable balance, and the test do not concern debit or credit of transactions, but the balance at the end of period. These tests of detail balance include 3 tests. The first one, review of monthly payable reconciliation. The auditor must review the reconciliation prepared by the client and investigate any unreconciled balance. Second, confirmation of balance. A written confirmation is sent to individual suppliers to confirm the amount outstanding and payable to supplier. There are most important controls in preparing confirmation requests, which are the first one, to get a complete and accurate list of supplier, including supplier with a 0 outstanding balance. Second, to ascertain that the amount, name and address are accurate when preparing the written confirmation. The last, to ensure that the confirmation is sent to supplier or creditor. The last one for this test is investigating for unrecorded liability. There are 3 procedures used to investigate unrecorded liabilities. The first one, to examine subsequent period purchase and payment transaction. This procedure I had been described in the purchase and payment cut of test. Second, to perform analytical procedure on expenses, to determine any unusual reduction in expenses. Contoh macam biasanya kita bil elektrik, kita biasa record satu company tu, kita biasa record untuk 1 tahun 12 bulan. Tapi hari tu tiba-tiba je kita record untuk 11 bulan. 1 bulan ni dikira sebagai accrued, belanja terakru. So dia dikira sebagai liability lah. So sebab tu sebab itulah dia jadi unrecorded liability. So kita kena investigate lah benda yang macam tu. So the third one, to examine any contractual agreements. Contohnya macam progress payments on long term contracts. Contoh long term contracts kan panjang masa dia. Kadang-kadang bila kita buat bayaran, kita lupa nak record benda tu. So auditor ni pula kenalah examine mana-mana agreements ke ataupun commitment ke yang company lupa nak record.
Next is the audit program in substantive test of purchase. The first one is to select a sample of transaction from the cash payment journal. For example, is vouched as the supporting documents. The second one is to select a sample of receiving reports, traced to entries in the voucher register and cash payments journal. The third one is to perform a year-end purchase cut-off test. Next, the auditor have to perform recalculation on supplier invoice to verify arithmetical accuracy. And then, the auditor have to scan the purchase journal for large or unusual items.
For the substantive test of accounts payable, first, the auditor must obtain a trial balance of accounts payable. How to do? Verify arithmetical accuracy of subsidiary ledger accounts and agree on the total to general ledger control. And then segregate amounts due to others from segregate trade creditors and scan trial balance for material debit balance. The second one, test selected transaction in a sample of individuals' accounts payable, including vouch to purchase orders, receiving reports, and vendors' invoices. Besides, trace credit entries in accounts to corresponding entries in purchase, inventory, expenses or other records, and trace debit entries to cash payments journal. Next, the auditor must confirm accounts payable balance with vendors or request vendor statements of unpaid invoices and then perform purchase cut-off test. After perform purchase cut-off test, the auditor must review payments subsequent to audit date and unpaid invoices for evidence of unrecorded liabilities. And the last one, review client's reconciliation of subsidiary ledger to general ledger control account. If you realize the first step is analytical procedure and the second one the second step until the last step, it is the test of details transaction and balance. Here I attach one of the example of an accounts payable confirmation request. To prepare this confirmation request, we must follow the important control that I have discovered earlier. And this confirmation should be supplied to the auditor's office. In addition, the auditor should properly list the selected creditors for confirmation and the result obtained in the audit working papers.
Audit objectives. Audit objectives for purchases and payables are concerned with obtaining sufficient audit evidence for the transactions and balances. The key issues in auditing purchases and payables are to ensure that all purchases are recorded and not understated, and all payables resulting from credit purchases are recorded. Therefore, the general audit objectives for both purchases and payables are: for internal control objective purchases are occurrence. Recorded purchases represent items actually required. Completeness. All sales transactions are recorded. The third one is accuracy. Purchases are recorded at the proper amounts. Cut off. Purchases are recorded in the proper accounting period. Classification. Purchases are recorded in proper accounts. Internal control objectives for payments are occurrence. Recorded cash payments represent cash actually paid to vendors. The second one is completeness. All cash payments are properly recorded. The third one is accuracy and cut-off. Cash payments are recorded at the proper amount and in the proper accounting period. And lastly, classification. Cash payments are recorded in proper accounts.
Okay, now we are going to the past year question for June 2019, question 5, payment and cash cycle. Let's go. Okay, so this is the question, question 5B. So the question says that the accountant clerk in charge of receiving the checks from credit customers, and he is responsible for preparing list of all checks received on daily basis. The particular customer name, amount received, and the checks number are written on the list. The checks are deposited daily by the accounting executive. The accountant clerk uses the list of checks to update the daily collection of check receipt in cash receipt journal. Okay, next we go to the purchase and cash payments. So the purchase of car parts from the supplier were made by an authorized purchasing officer. A 2-copy pre-numbered purchase order is prepared by the purchasing officer and approved by the purchasing manager. A soft copy of the approved purchase order is sent to the supplier by email. The car parts will be received from the supplier by the purchasing officer, who will compare the physical item received against one copy of the purchase order. When the invoice is received from the supplier, the accountant clerk matches it with 2 copies of the purchase order. The accountant clerk would then prepare the payment voucher and check for submission to the accountant. The accountant will ensure that the amount on the check matches with the amount on the payment voucher before signing the check. Okay, now we're going to see what the question are asked in this question, in this statement. So the question asks for these 5 major weaknesses in the above internal control subsystem. So as before this I read, there are 5 weaknesses, a few weaknesses in the internal control system that can be seen by the paragraph. So let's go one by one. First, the check can be altered after sign. Next, the damaged goods are received. After that, the quantity and goods received are not in agreement with the purchase order. Also, double payment for a supplier invoice. Last but not least, invoices are recorded to the wrong supplier account. So you can see these weaknesses in the statement that I read before in question 5b. So let us go to the next question. The next question is explain the possible effect of each identified weakness above. So these are the effect that can be happen if the weaknesses are identified. So the first possible outcome is can be a mis-issue check, and the numbers can be altered, or the person receiving the check can be also altered. So that means that there will be a alteration of check to those who receive, or changing the number onto the check that has been received by the supplier, so that they can gain more income or more money from the check. Next, the damaged goods can affect the production of the company, which the company can suffer or loss. So that means that if the company didn't check it quite the stock or the purchase detail, so that they will have maybe a damaged good. So means that the damaged good cannot be used into the production line and cannot be used into making the company's service or product, so that the company may suffer a loss from this weakness. So the third weakness is the quantity of the good received is not the same than the purchase order. Then the company raw material or stock will be have shortage and will suffer loss from the shortage. Okay, so if the quantity is not the same, there will be shortage of stock, that will cause the company to have to buy more and more raw materials to cover the loss of the shortage of the stocks. Okay. Next, the double payment can affect the company financial position and also interrupt the company cash flow. Okay, so what happen if we have double entry? So the double payment can affect the company cash flow. Means that company can have a shortage of money, and that will also ruin the company cash flow in order to pay the other suppliers, or to buy more raw material, or to have a business rolling. Can also affect the business rolling, so that the company cannot produce more and more goods. Okay, next. Last but not least, the invoice are recorded to the wrong supply account. This may affect the further payment, accrued payment of the company. Okay, so that means that if the company have recorded the wrong supply account payment, so that the company will have more and more debt to the other suppliers. So this is bad for the company cash flow and for the company future. So because they have more liabilities that will the company incurred, and the company also doesn't know where the money go, or the cash flow, or the checks that have been paid, and they will suffer loss due to this weakness. Okay, last but not least, the third and final question, question C. So, suggest a recommended to overcome each weaknesses identified above. So there are 5 weaknesses. So there are 5 possible effects and 5 recommendations. So the first weaknesses, the check can be altered after sign. The possible effect, there can be misused check, and the numbers can be altered, or the person receive it also can be altered. So the recommendation, check should be mailed by the check signers. So the next one, the next weaknesses, the damaged goods are received. So the possible effect, the damaged good can be affect production of the company, which the company can suffer loss. So the recommendation, all the goods are checked, goods issued are checked against approved purchase in terms of quantity and type of good by independent personnel. So the next third and weaknesses, the quantity and good received are not in agreement with the purchase order. So the possible effect is the company raw material or stock will have a shortage, and they will be suffer from a shortage. And next, all the goods issued are, the recommendation is that all the goods are issued are checked against approved purchase order in terms of quantity and type of good by independent personnel. So let's go to the next weaknesses and next possible recommendation and possible effect and recommendation. Okay, the last two is the last two weaknesses. Double payments for supply invoice. So the possible effect is double payment may affect the company financial position and also can interrupt the company high cash flow. So how to solve it, or the recommendations are all paid supply invoice should be stamped paid, and the last one, invoice are recorded to the wrong supply account. So invoice, the possible effect is invoice are recorded to the wrong supply account may affect the further payment and accrued payment to the company. So how to solve it, or the recommendations are periodic accounting for all supplier invoice, GRN and purchase order. That's all.
From this topic, the conclusion are purchases and payables are the main accounts included in the purchase cycle. The auditor should understand the business functions related to the purchase and purchase credit to determine necessary internal controls over purchases and payable accounts. The audit objective for transaction are occurrence, completeness, accuracy, cut-off, and classification, while for balance, existence, rights, obligation, completeness, and valuation also location. In order to achieve the audit objective, the auditors should perform tests of controls and substantive tests. The main concern for auditing account is the completeness of record, so the auditors must searching for unrecorded liability. However, the procedures are normally performed when auditors perform the cut-off test for purchases and payments. A positive form of confirmation is normally used to confirm the account payables balance. With that, thank you and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.